In the last video, I talked you through how the 4 chords approach gives you a quick and easy set of guidelines to help get you to the shots you want on location. One of those guidelines was to create the image you see in your head, and if taking the photo is the first part of that process, then finishing the image in the edit is the second. In this video, I'm going to show you how I edited this photograph number 13 to achieve the look I wanted for it. In doing so, I'll demonstrate how Photoshop is the perfect tool to allow you to both experiment, explore and build an image up in a few steps by making basic adjustments simply to light and colour. Understanding how light and colour can change the feel of an image is a skill that anyone can learn, and Photoshop is the perfect place to play and learn it. Let me show you. In the last video, I went through the process of how I decided to shoot number 13 as my lifeguard station of choice from a beach in San Diego. If you haven't seen that video, click here and you can go and have a look at it. In that video, I talk about how the lifeguard station actually conjures up a lot of images of California, and that any photograph you look at is actually a combination of what's in front of you, what you know about the place, and what you imagine about the place, and you combine those all into making a photograph. So on the day, I actually took 40 photographs of number 13. 21 of them were with the intention of using stacked images, as you can see here. If you look at these photographs here, you can see they're taken at different exposures. The idea being that I would stack them together in Photoshop and get a full tonal range. But when I edited the image, I didn't actually use stacked images. I just used this one, 4840. And as you can see in Lightroom, I didn't actually touch it at all. So why is that? Do I hate Lightroom? Well, no, I don't. But because I knew a lot of the effects I wanted to use with it could only be achieved in Photoshop, I decided that I would just import the image directly into Photoshop and make the layer a smart object and use Adobe Camera Raw from there. Let me show you what I mean by that. There it is, and essentially I changed the background to a smart object. When you do that, you can go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and then Adobe Camera Raw opens up. And as you can see, Adobe Camera Raw is exactly the same as the Develop module in Lightroom. All the tools are there. So I decided that as most of the changes I was going to make were the ones that were in Photoshop, I'd just do the whole thing in one piece of software rather than having both open at once. And because it's a well-balanced image, all the information is kept in both the very bright and the very dark areas. If you look in the shadows here, you can still see information in the sand dunes. If you look in the white areas up here, you can see that all the detail is kept in the lifeguard station. So this was a good image to choose because it has a full tonal range available to edit from, and it saves you time. As you can see, the starting image is very dark. So obviously the first thing to do is brighten it up. In that respect, I've just raised the exposure by just over 1 stop. I've left the contrast. I very rarely use the contrast in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. I prefer to change contrast using black and white sliders instead. And you can see here that in black and white, I've pushed the whites all the way to -100 and the blacks all the way up to +100. And the reason for that is simply because I wanted the image not to look flat exactly, but I wanted to take the kind of aggressive nature that sharp and hard contrast gives you. I wanted it to have a softer, almost dreamlike quality. And I've emphasized that even further by taking the highlights down to -100 and pushing the shadows up to +55. It gives the entire image a softer, lighter look. So those are the starting points for making the photograph I eventually wanted. So I clicked on OK, click on OK now. And the first thing I did was actually crop the image. The image is cropped from the original. I'm going to pull it down slightly so you can see it better. The image is cropped down to a 16:8 format because, as I explained in the previous video, what I really wanted to do was give it this widescreen cinematic look, which is reminiscent of Hollywood. The next thing I wanted to do was to try and push the colors nearer to where I wanted them to be. And one of the best ways to do that in Photoshop is to use color lookup tables. A color lookup table is the one I used. It's Fuji Eterna 250 or Kodak 2395. And what a color lookup table does is it doesn't change the edit, it doesn't change the lightness or shade in your image. What it does is it remaps the color. So black is not inky black, it's a softer black. Blue is a different shade of blue. And often if you're starting with an image and you know you have a look in your mind and you can't quite picture how to get it. Using 3D LUTs is a really good way to have a look at different looks for your image and see what ones you like. As you can see, I'm just going to flip through them slowly here. You use blending modes with these. I'm not going to go into that at the moment. But as you see, you get very different styles, which perhaps will take you closer to what it is you want for your final image. And it's often a good place to start. So I got close to what I wanted with this one. I like the look of it. If you look at the before, you look at the after, again, it just gives that feeling of airiness that I was after. I then added a curves layer, and now curves, I just took the blacks up higher. And the reason you do that is that you don't want solid deep blacks in your layer. You just want the deepest black to be a light color. And that's all you raise that for, again, to give this feeling of softness to an image. See here, I've got a vibrance layer, but if I actually click on it and show you it in the properties, you can see I haven't done anything with it at all. Now, when I edited the image, I did sort of play with this and experiment with moving the vibrance just to see what kind of different looks it gives me. And this is something I always encourage people to do, and I would encourage you to do with your images. It's just to load a tool up and play with it. It's the only way you really learn properly is by playing with the tools within Photoshop. I decided not to use anything in the vibrance layer. And what I did then was I wanted to use a tool that was backing Camera Raw. Now, the wonderful thing about Photoshop is that if you put in a number of layers to make changes, as I have here, and then you decide you want to use the tools backing Camera Raw on the new image you've created, you can do it. I essentially took a stamp of the layer. You do that by pressing Control, Shift, Alt and E, or Command, Option, Shift and E on a Mac. And it will give you a stamp of the layer, which is just a record of all the changes you've made up to that point. You can then restart your editing from there. I created this new layer. I converted it into a smart object, as I showed you earlier. And then I went back into the Camera Raw filter just to get hold of one slider, which is the clarity slider. And I wanted to further enhance the softness of the image by making it almost look slightly dreamlike. And the clarity filter is a really good way of doing that. I'm going to put it to 0, and then I'm going to move it up to -15. Oh, sorry, move it down, should I say, to -15. And it just adds a softness to the image. It gives it a slight glow, which again enhances its dreamlike quality. So there it is. If I show you on this, that's it at -15. So that's it on, that's it off, on, off. And I didn't want to overdo it. I didn't want it to make it look like you were looking through a sort of Gaussian blur, but I just wanted to add a glow to it to make it look slightly more ethereal and dreamlike. The clarity slider is absolutely perfect for doing that. So there we have that change. Now, I noticed when I was looking at this picture that at the time I shot it, I used a polarizing filter. And in this top right-hand side, it might actually be difficult to see on YouTube, but in this top right-hand side, the color changes slightly. It goes deeper. If you look at that, and which is the top right-hand side of my frame, then I go across to the left, you can see there's almost like a smudge almost. So what I did was added a curves layer which over brightened the entire image, and then I added a mask to it, and then I painted on just over the dark area there, as you can see. I used a soft round brush at about 1 or 2% and just gradually painted back in the lightness to this area which had been taken away by using the polarizing filter. There are many ways you can do it, and that was just a quick fix for me. What I did next was add a hue saturation layer to get me closer to where I wanted to be with the final look of the image. When I looked at the image as it was now, the number 13 seemed to pop too much. It was very, very vibrant, so I wanted to take that down. Also, the blue was too realistic looking almost, and I wanted it to have that look of a faded Kodak photo. So I used hue saturation to get the colors I wanted. And let me show you what I did. If I show you the properties panel up here, I changed the yellow, obviously, to -32 to bring the yellow saturation of this down. Let me put it back to 0. And as you can see, that's how it came into the image. And I just took the yellow down on that. The other thing I did was change the blues. And I changed the hue of the blue. It's at -17. If I take it back to 0, that's how it came in. and I just took it down to -17 and pushed it more towards a cyan colour, which is what you see with these Kodak prints when they faded over a while. I also then just increased the saturation because it was down to about here and I wanted it to look a bit warmer, so I put it up to about +18. I then made another stamp of the image, and as I say, it's a good way of just making a record of where you've been. You can go over into history and you can of course create snapshots. I always forget to create snapshots, and that's what I tend to do every now and again, is just put in a stamp layer. So I sort of made my first stamp layer here, and then I used the camera raw filter on it. I made another stamp layer here, and then had to think about it, what I wanted to change next. The only other thing I did was I wanted to bring more yellow back into the image because I thought the colour had started to desaturate too much. So I added a simple photo filter in Photoshop and used deep yellow and tinkered with the slider and settled on a density of 36%, and it gives it this nice yellow glow. Having done that, the image was once again too bright, so you added yet another curves layer. If you look at the curves layer, I've just pushed the black area along. If you look at the histogram there, you can see that there's no black level information there. So I just pushed this along to the bottom of the black area on the histogram just to make it that little bit darker. There it is before and there it is after. And that's how I arrived at the final image. So there you have it. In this video, we've played to one of Photoshop's great strengths, using layers to add colour and light to an image to transform it to more closely match what we see in our mind's eye. Shaping an image with light and colour is literally what photography means, drawing with light. And the editing suite is as much a part of the photographer's toolset as the camera itself. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please click the thumbs up icon below, it really will help me out. You can also subscribe to the channel and ring the bell below to be notified when new videos are available. But you knew that anyway, didn't you? See you next time.